Oops.
Okay, now that he's gone, we can talk about him.
He's a nice guy.
A nice guy. Yeah, but he's Southern, like Florida and stuff. And
No more than
I'm
you're
sorry.
Southern for having lived in Atlanta.
hey, Atlanta,
What about North Carolina?
not really Southern. Georgia is Southern. There's a difference.
Atlanta is very Southern.
Atlanta has so little to, you drive 10 miles outside of Atlanta, you are on a different planet.
No kidding.
That's for sure.
Okay,
God, really.
okay. Now I'd like to, here we go. Ladies and gentlemen, here we go.
Sorry, somehow I got.
I'd like to introduce Rabbi Anthony Fratello.
Ta-da-ta-da.
Round two. Shabbat shalom, everybody. It's nice to see you.
Shalom.
I was saying before I made a big of a mistake, and so I'm gonna say my all cakes now, and hopefully you'll store them up for Yom Kippur for me. We've been traveling for a few weeks, as I was saying before, my family and I, and actually we're in California right now, but we were overseas for a couple of weeks. And so I prepared in advance, and somehow I ended up with the wrong Torah portion. So if you tuned in this morning to learn about Korach, I'm going to apologize to you, and instead we're going to learn about Fukat. And I hope that's not going to really ruin anybody's day. And Stan, maybe with your indulgence, you can do Korach next week. And I apologize for that. I only discovered it this morning as I was looking at my notes to prepare for class this morning, and I realized my mistake. And so I will ask your indulgence if that's all right. David, you had a question about that.
No, didn't they say that the Torah is not chronological?
In fact, the Torah is not chronological, so I guess as a rabbi, I can be unchronological too. Steve-O, you got a question for me?
Just a comment. I thought all you rabbis knew all of this stuff and you didn't have to prepare, so you should be able to do it off the cuff.
Well, you know what? If you really want, I can try and win it on Korach, but I don't have the text in front of me, so that I don't know if I would recommend that.
Whatever portion you want to do is fine with me.
All right. Well, thank you. I appreciate the consideration. So you'll excuse my faux pas, and I will try to make it up for you in the future. But again, many thanks to Rabbi Davids for his gracious invitation to come to teach you all, and what's become a nice summer tradition for me, and I hope it's something that you've all enjoyed, is our chance to study a little bit together during the summer months. So let's begin with a blessing for study. If you want to join with me, if you know the words, Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. For you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe, follows us with mitzvot and commands us to busy ourselves with words of Torah, and we are busy this morning. Indeed. And so if you've got a question along the way, feel free to raise your hand or do something to wave at me to get my attention, or you can drop a note in the chat and we can take a look at that as we go through if you've got a particular question about the text that we're looking at. So as I mentioned before, through a bit of a snafu and mistake on my part, I've got the wrong portion for us this morning. But we'll spend a little bit of time taking a look at Parshat Fukat, which is next week's portion. But it comes from near the end of the book of Numbers. And if we think about a lot of what Numbers is about, which is mainly about the sort of wrapping up of this period of wandering in the wilderness, a lot of the bits and pieces of the final part of the story begin to take form in Fukat. So for instance, we read about the death of Miriam, and a few chapters later, we read about the death of Aaron. So two of the three key figures in the history of our people's wander in the wilderness leave us in this week's Torah portion. We read about some of the experiences that our ancestors have out in the wilderness, how they're starting to run out of water, how they're starting to run out of food, how they're starting to gripe with Moses. Moses, after 40 years, is starting to lose his patience. And it's in this week's portion that it's in next week's portion that we're talking about this morning, that he hits the rock twice out of anger and frustration. And as the text tells us, loses the privilege of leading the people into the promised land. That's found in this week's Torah portion. We begin to see conflicts that the people have with some of the other nations that they're traveling through as they're making their way towards the land of Canaan. So there's struggles with the Edomites and Sichon and Og, who are these two characters of significance that we end up dealing with in the last part of the book of Numbers. They're sort of sitting there on the horizon, kind of waiting in the wings to play their part on the history and the stage that our people are moving through. Part of the text that I wanted to take a look at this morning is actually something that at first glance might seem very strange to us, to say, why are we as Reformed Jews who are kind of removed from discussions of sort of sacrifice and the temple and the priests and all that kind of stuff. Why are we spending time reading this material, which doesn't really seem germane to us in our position in the world today? But I think that there is some interesting things that we can find in this text, especially when viewed through the lens of the commentaries, because the commentators have some interesting things to say about this piece of the text that we're going to look at. And we're looking at the piece of the text that involved the red heifer, this red cow that was sacrificed and burned, and that they took the ash of this animal that was consumed in fire, and then they prepared an unguent, a potion, a liquid that was sprinkled on people that would help relieve them of their state of impurity should they come into contact with a dead body. If we remember what tradition says about the sacrificial cult, we can't go to make sacrifices to God if we're in a state of impurity. And if we're in a state of impurity and we go make a sacrifice, we end up with getting a zets from God, okay, a big barbecue. And so we have to be assiduously careful about maintaining ourselves in states of purity. And there's lots of things that can impart impurity. Tradition tells us that a woman during her time of her monthly infirmity, as the text tells us, is impure. If you come into contact with her, you become impure. You can become impure if you have a nocturnal emission. You can become impure if you come into contact with an impure thing. And one of the main things that is a source of impurity is you come into contact with a goof mate, a dead body. And so the beginning of the section that we're going to look at talks about the preparation of this special liquid that will impart the purification from the impurity. So I'm going to go to a screen share here and pull up the text that we're going to look at. And hopefully, can you all see it this morning? Is it showing up on everybody's text? Yeah? Okay, good. So this is, as I said before, this is Chukat. And if you've got a plout in front of you, you got the page numbers on here. If you don't have a plout in front of you, I got the English included. So we can take a look at it and read it as we go on our merry way. Hang on just a second. I want to see if I can pull up the chat window in case you all got any questions or anything. Feel free to drop me a line as we do this. All right, so let's take a look. This is Numbers 19, verses 1 through 10. Let me just kind of read through it real quick, and then we can spend some time hacking it up. The Eternal One spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, this is the ritual law that the Eternal One has commanded you. Instruct the Israelite people to bring you a red cow without blemish, in which there is no defect, on which no yoke has been laid. So, for those of you who are in the cattle raising industry, okay, a nice, beautiful red cow that's never been worked, and you set it aside and you take it. It's got to be without defect, right? And we're going to take a look at that in a second as to what the rabbis think of that. You shall give it to Eleazar the priest, that should be taken outside the camp and slaughtered in his presence. Eleazar the priest shall take some of its blood with his finger and sprinkle it 7 times toward the front of the tent of meeting. The cow shall be burned in his sight. Its hide, its flesh, its blood shall be burned, its dung included. And the priest shall take cedar wood, hyssop, and crimson stuff and throw them into the fire, consuming the cow. Okay. Up until this point, nothing should seem particularly strange or odd or out of place about this sacrifice. This sacrifice is like any of the hundreds of other sacrifices that we're talking about in the book of Leviticus or the book of Numbers. Pretty standard, pretty straightforward. Unlike some sacrifices that are ones that are partially consumed, okay, this is a shalem sacrifice, the whole thing. And when I say the whole thing, I mean the whole thing. It's hide, it's flesh, it's blood, even its dung. And the whole thing is burned up with cedar wood, which is aromatic kind of resinous wood, hyssop, which is variously translated as some sort of fragrant kind of growing plant out in the wilderness. Think of it as, for any of you who've been to Israel, I was always taught to think of za'atar. If you've ever had that great green seasoning that's put on pita bread and stuff that we get sometimes in Israel, and red crimson stuff, and you throw it in the fire and you burn it. Fabulous, no problem. Now, however, we start to go a little bit astray. The priest shall wash his garments and bathe his body in water. Okay. After that, the priest may re-enter the camp, but he shall be unclean until evening. He who performed the burning shall also wash his garments in water, bathe his body in water, and be unclean until evening. A man who is clean shall gather up the ashes of the cow and deposit them outside the camp in a clean place, to be kept for water of lustration for the Israelite community. That's this water of cleansing. It is for cleansing. He who gathers up the ashes of the cow shall also wash his clothes and be unclean until evening. That should be a permanent law for the Israelites and for the strangers who reside among you. Okay? What's strange about this? What looks screwy about this? What is unexpected about this text? Who can see it? And I gave you a bunch of hints. If you've been paying attention, you should know. What's strange about this?
He's unclean.
All right, Steve-O, lay it on me. You're muted, buddy. I can't hear you.
He's unclean until evening.
Yeah. All right. All right. So let's talk about this for a second here. This text, right, is about teaching us to prepare a liquid, a salve, an anointing fluid that by its very definition provides cleansing. Okay. And here again, when we talk about the temple, sometimes we got to be thinking slightly differently. When we talk about cleansing, it's not 409 cleansing, okay? This isn't, scrubbing bubbles cleansing. This is spiritual cleansing. It's important when we consider it, because sometimes one of the things that the priests do to purify and cleanse the temple is take a bunch of blood and splatter it around everywhere, okay? Or go up to the priest, the worshiper, and splatter him with blood. Now, that's not going to make him clean from a Mr. Clean point of view, okay? But from a spiritual point of view, it imparts cleansing. So this is water that's supposed to impart a spiritual cleansing. And yet the people that are intimately involved in preparing it, the priest who oversees it, the individual who actually does the burning, the person that's tasked with gathering up the ashes, the three of them become unclean. And this is the part that the rabbis, when they look at this section of text, they latch onto this. They say, what the hell? How, right? How is it that the preparation for something that is supposed to cleanse us, okay, has the effect of making unclean the people who prepare it? Okay, everyone sort of get the idea there. Is anybody lost on that? What do you think? Any initial thoughts on that? First of all, have any of you come across this text before? Have any of you seen this before? Some of us have seen this before. All right, feel it. What gives? Who has a thought about this or a way to think of this or interpret it? You can put a note in here.
I would have a comment on that.
Request about raising hands, take turns speaking. Please help him honor this. Good, thank you. Yes, please help me honor that. Good. So who's got a thought? Tofun, is your hand raised?
Dan here speaking.
Okay, Dan, lay it on me.
I don't think that this interpretation of the word unclean should be taken literally.
Okay.
Because sometimes we have a term which starts out to mean one thing and it ends up meaning another. Unclean might simply mean that when you're unclean, you have to separate yourself, because that's the meaning of unclean. You have to separate yourself.
Okay.
So here they're really saying the priest has to separate himself because he's done something that's extremely holy, and he needs to meditate about it for a little bit.
Beautiful, beautiful, good. I like that. I like that interpretation. I think you've got something there that's worth looking at and worth talking about. The only thing that would be just a sort of a fly in the ointment is to look at here, this in the Hebrew right here. I'm going to highlight that tameh, right? And this is a word that crops up a lot of times, which is generally translated as being impure. Okay. However, if we think broadly, okay, if we think more broadly about how we might understand that word tameh as not necessarily meaning impure from a negative pejorative sense, okay, but from a more sort of broader sense, to say this person who's tameh is in a state where you should not come near them at this time, okay, then it certainly opens up to that to that way of understanding. There's actually one of the comments from one of the scholars that we're going to take a look at in a few minutes that I think touches on that, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to bring this text to talk about, because I think your thought of that, your interpretation of that is one that absolutely helps to kind of make this more clear for us as we move forward. David, I see your hand raised.
Thank you. Yes, well, two comments. Is the red heifer similar to the scapegoat that there was another story in where the scapegoat took the sins and I forget who threw them over the cliff? So the red heifer is the scapegoat. The Eleazar is near because the heifer should be burned in his sight, and it doesn't say how far away, but assuming he's close by. And then the person who does the burning is near, so they get contaminated by the sins that the red heifer is taking. And the guy who is cleaning up the ashes likewise is contaminated by it. So but one other thing is, and I've heard discussions about the red heifer before from different rabbis and different things. And isn't this one of the things that it is unexplainable, no matter how the debates have taken place over the thousands of years, that there is no rational explanation for this, even though we try to make it.
Good. Yeah, David, you're absolutely spot on with that last comment. There's a handful of places in rabbinic thought where the rabbis just essentially do this. We don't know. When the Messiah comes, he'll explain it to us. Okay. One of those is my personal favorite, which is the law of shatnez. Okay, shatnez is this rule that says you're not supposed to mix linen and wool together. And the rabbis say, why is God so upset about this? What's the big deal? Okay, one of the other places is this text right here. And essentially, in rabbinic literature, the rabbis say we're at a loss for how to understand this. When the Messiah comes, he'll explain it to us. And of course, as Reformed Jews, we don't wait for a personal Messiah, we wait for a Messianic age, which takes all of us working together. So maybe working together this morning, we can come up with a way of understanding. Now, what I want to say to you is that your connection with the idea of the scapegoat is a really good one. And the Nachmanides, who writes about 1,000 years ago, actually touches on that very point. We'll take a look at his comment in just a second, but just to review. So back in the book of Leviticus, in the section that talks about our observances for Yom Kippur, one of the things that we're supposed to do on Yom Kippur is we get a couple of goats, right? And we cast lots upon the goats. And one goat goes off for one sacrifice, and the other goat is set aside, and the priest takes it and confesses all of the sins of the community on that goat. And it's sent out into the wilderness with the hands of a trustworthy man, and the trustworthy man swats it on the tuchus and sends it out into the wilderness, and thereby takes away the people's sins out into the wilderness. The text tells us, the Torah tells us that the goat takes the sins away to Azazel. We don't know who Azazel is. Some of the commentators say this was some goat demon that lived out in the wilderness, right? And actually, Nachmanides, in looking at this text and trying to understand it, draws on that same point. So this is the commentary of Nachmanides right here, writing, as I said, about 1,000 years ago. Rabbi Moshe ben Nachman, right? He first of all quotes us back to Rashi, which takes us from ridicule. Okay. The reason the northern nations heap scorn on Israel about this particular sacrifice more than any others, okay, is because the animal is slaughtered outside the sacred enclosure, right? So this is a sacrifice that doesn't happen at the altar in the center of the encampment, at the center of the tabernacle, but rather in the sort of out in the ash heap. Therefore, it appears to be offered in the open to the goat demons, right there, as we see in this section of Leviticus. That's the section of Leviticus that talks about the scapegoat ritual. But, Nachmanides says, yes, it may sound like that, but it's different than that. The truth is, it is meant to transfer the spirit of uncleanness outside the encampment. So, you're right, David. The exact goal of this is exactly the same. The scapegoat was meant to take our sins to an inaccessible region where we couldn't get at them. In the same way, this water of lustration, this water that's supposed to cleanse us from our impurity coming into contact with the dead body, does the same way. It takes that impurity away from us to save us from it. So good. That was great thought on that. Okay, there's another question that's on the other hand. Steve, you got another thought?
I have a thought, as does Mona. My quick thought about why, to me, that doesn't make sense is I thought we need the red heifer to
Can you speak up a little bit? I can't quite hear you.
Sure. We need the red heifer to sanctify the temple. So it's a chicken and egg problem if you actually sacrifice it within the temple.
Oh, good. Interesting. I like that, right? We need the red. It's like a chicken and egg kind of thing, right?
Right.
If we're impure, we can't be in the temple. But if we're in the temple, we can't possibly be impure. So we have to provide ourselves a way of purifying ourselves before we go in. So we have to do it on the outside. I like that. That's good. That's good. The rabbis know about chickens and eggs, and which one crossed the road, we'd be in business. That's good. All right, other thoughts about this? All right, let's take a look just really quickly.
Mona also had a comment.
Say again?
I also wanted to say something. This relates to your earlier question about.
Just a little louder. I can't. I'm getting old. I turned 50 a couple months ago, and my hearing's gone to hell.
Okay, sorry. Is this better?
Yep.
I was just thinking that the length of time that the person who conducted the ritual remains impure might have something to do with the author's recognition of the performance aspects of ritual. That for the people who are performing to make this ceremony meaningful and spiritual for the others, they may need some time themselves, and it makes the ritual more spectacular or more special.
Beautiful. No, I like that. Good. I like that idea. This discussion that we're having about the ritual aspects and how it impacts us, I think, is very good. And again, this is part of why I think that a text like this, which on the surface might not seem valuable to us as modern liberal Jews in a modern world, okay? But this kind of discussion about it is so trenchant and so valuable. Yeah, the people who perform this ritual undertake this amazing spiritual journey. They have to put a lot of themselves into it. They need some time to reflect and heal on it, and to have appreciated the sanctity of the moment that they've gone through. At the beginning of our worship for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, there's the Hineni prayer, right? Which is traditionally kind of thought of as let me pray to make sure that I can pray correctly for everybody else. It's like your shlichei tzibur, your prayer leaders are taking a moment for themselves to seek some spirituality, so that then they're capable of carrying everybody else through that experience. So these people needed the ability to get themselves together in a sense after having gone through this experience. Good. So let's just take a look very quickly here at some of the other parts that had come in here. Okay, good. This is an individual by the name of Ibn Ezra. Ibn Ezra wrote about a century before Nachmanides, who we were talking about a few moments ago. Ibn Ezra's goal in looking at the text is he tried to read it from a very straightforward kind of point of view. His goal was always to arrive at the shots. What was the simple way of understanding the text? A lot of the things that we learn about the grammar of biblical Hebrew and the structure of the individual passages that we read comes from Ibn Ezra, who's struggling to really understand the text in a really simple, kind of basic sort of way. And we see that in his thought here about this comment right here, red cow. He says, therefore, it must therefore be a fully grown animal, right, not a calf. And says that that's important. That if it's a calf, it's not as hasn't quite fulfilled its purpose all the way. Now he quotes a sage by the name of Sadia. Sadia, who wrote about 150 years before him. Sadia Gaon, who was one of these great scholars who lived in the East. And Sadia is in many ways kind of a transitional character, taking us from a much more traditional, really just kind of loyal to Jewish perspective kind of, and looking with a little bit more of a philosophical nature toward what the text says. The waters of illustration, he says, described here, which make an unclean person clean, but make a clean priest who prayers him unclean, are like honey, which is dangerous to one who suffers an excess of red bile, but beneficial to one who suffers an excess of phlegm. All right. So if any of you out there this morning are suffering an excess of red bile, no show of hands, you don't have to tell me. But if you are, have a little honey, and that's going to help you. Whereas if you're having phlegm, that's not going to be helpful for you. Essentially, what Sadia is saying is that there is a reason, there's a logical reason in the text for why it is that the person who prepares it themselves become unclean. Because there are some substances, there are some things which are helpful to somebody in one situation, but end up being unhelpful to somebody in another situation. Now, Ibn Ezra dismisses this at the end by saying there's no need for pseudo-medical explanations here, okay? So he's, again, from his much more sort of straightforward point of view, let's understand the simple meaning of the text, he's ready to dismiss that. But Sadia's point comes in here, and I think is useful for us as we're trying to understand this text. Sometimes things that are beneficial to some people, okay, may not be beneficial to the people that are actually doing the work. And this is a challenge, of course, for any of us that are trying to live in a community or a society. Right? Sometimes we need to take upon ourselves the obligations, tasks that might be difficult for ourselves to perform or might cause challenges to ourselves. But in essence, these are important things that are worth doing in order to help other people in the community. In instance here, the priests and the individuals who are responsible for preparing this liquid that's going to purify people from impurity, they're going to suffer on account of it, but they're having done so ultimately plays a role in assisting those who are in the community otherwise.
Rabbi,
excuse me,
Rabbi, Tamara has her hand up.
Oh, Stan?
Could you please call on Professor Eskenazi?
Yes, by all means. I'm sorry. Where I did not see. Where is I can't. Oh, please, Tamara.
Hi, thank you. Could you say something about the terminology, calling the purifying water me nida, with nida being the same word for menstruation?
So listen, I play at understanding Hebrew, and there's odds are that other people on this call might understand Hebrew far better than I. But if we look here, Ibn Ezra does use that word me nida, and nida, of course, is the word that is commonly used for a woman who's going through a period of menstruation. I'm gonna go out on a limb. I'm not a perfect Hebrew linguist, so you'll have to forgive my ignorance on that. But I'm gonna say to you that I would be willing to bet that it is in fact the same word. So if we're talking about this as from a terminology point of view, then yeah, I would say that the two are most likely connected or related. That a woman who is in a state of nidah is impure, right, and needs to be cleansed by that by going to the mikveh. In the same way that this water here cleanses somebody from the impurity that comes from contact with a group made, a dead body. The stench from I was just reading this note here, in the stench from burning the entire cow would have stuck to the man who was slippery. Oh, good. That's quite possibly. So if you want to take a look here from David in the chat, David, I think that's a very good point. Its odds are that the individual who performed this ritual, was then sort of became, let's say, odoriferous on account of having to perform this mitzvah, and therefore that period of time, that extra day until he became pure, was a chance for the smell to maybe get off of him, and he changed clothes and washed himself before he went on, which is a good reminder for any of us who are celebrating the 4th of July with a barbecue, right, that the remainder may stay on there afterwards. The last one I just want to take a very quick look on is from Bechor Shore here, this last comment. Instruct the Israelite people to bring you red cow without blemish. This elaborate procedure for cleansing oneself for contact with the dead, or to prevent the Israelites from lingering with their dead for too long, from consulting with mediums to seeking information from the dead, and from treating the dead with disrespect by using their bodies like objects. Example, turning their skin into leather, and etc. Now, again, for us who are accustomed to sort of our modern Western funeral practices, which mean that when somebody dies, you take them and you bury them, this might seem odd, but remember, for our ancestors that lived in the ancient Near East, the approach to being in the presence of dead bodies was very different. For example, the Egyptians, right? The whole goal of the Egyptians, so much of their culture and their study was to figure out how to keep the dead around after they had died. And they created this whole process whereby they turned dead pharaohs essentially into beef jerky, which would sit around forever, or at least until the British started unwrapping them all in the 19th century. So what Bechor Shore is saying here is that this whole sort of ritual was designed to reinforce for us this value of Judaism, that we're supposed to not linger with our dead, lest we try to communicate with them, which is something that we're expressly forbidden from doing, or to treat their bodies with disrespect, which is also something that we're kind of expressly told not to do. Right? Any thoughts about that? Liz? You want to ready to move on to the next section? Let's take a look at the next section. So now we've talked about this, and now we're learning the reason why all of this is so important. I mentioned it before, but now we're going to take a look at the text itself to understand it. He who touches the corpse of any human being shall be unclean for 7 days. He shall cleanse himself with it on the 3rd day and on the 7th day, and then be clean. If he fails to cleanse himself on the 3rd day and the 7th day, he shall not be clean. Whoever touches the corpse, the body of the person who died, and does not cleanse himself, defiles God's tabernacle. That person should be cut off from Israel. Since the water of lustration was not dashed on him, he remains unclean. His uncleanness is still upon him. So herein is the reason why this water is so important, because anybody who comes into contact with a group mate, a dead body, is in the state of uncleanness, and if they don't cleanse themselves, then they're at risk of defiling God's tabernacle, which shall bring upon them the worst possible punishment, which is karet, being cut off, essentially losing our portion in Torah. All right, Steve, you had your hand raised?
I do.
Yeah.
What does a Jewish undertaker do?
Ah, good. What do Jewish undertakers do? Now, all of this ritual is actually no longer incumbent upon us because the temple does not exist anymore. All right? So a lot of the rules that governed our behavior that were dictated to us in Torah are no longer operative because they were things that were reliant upon the existence of the temple. Okay, if I wanted to, if think of it this way. Let's say I inadvertently came into contact, instead of being an undertaker, let's say I was a paramedic, I was a fireman, and God forbid I reported to a car accident or something, and I had to help somebody who had passed on. I'm now impure. All right, now, the problem is I don't have a way to purify myself, okay? Because to purify myself from that impurity requires, number one, that there's a red heifer, number two, that there's a priest, number three, that he can take it to a sacred place and burn it and prepare the water of lustration and dash it upon me. If there's no priest to do that, if there's no red heifer to do that, if there's no place to do it, then God cannot hold me liable for being in a state of impurity. We talked briefly a little bit about Yom Kippur earlier. During Yom Kippur, one of the, we read the morning of Yom Kippur, we read Parshat Nitzavim, or parts of Nitzavim and Vayelet, part of which says that God has given us all these commandments, that we should live by them. The rabbis take a look at that text. They say, Chai v'hem? They say, yes. Lo sheyamut v'hem. Not that we should die by them, right? The mitzvot are given to us to live by, not to die by. The way the rabbis understand that is to say that God doesn't ask us to do anything that's impossible. God's not going to ask you to jump over your house in a single bound. Okay, why? Because human beings aren't capable of doing that. And it's reinforced in the same portion of text. Everything that God's given us, the text says, Lo v'shamayim, it's not up in the heavens. That you have to say, who's going to send up to the heavens and take hold of it for us so that we can do it? And it says, Lo me'er yam, it's not on the other side of the ocean. So you have to say, who's going to go to the other side of the ocean and grab hold of it that we can learn it and do it? No, it's here. It's already with us. It's in our mouths and our hearts to do it. Okay. These laws don't apply right now because there is no way to prepare the waters of purification. Now, the reason why this becomes very interesting, so many of you have probably heard that amongst our more traditional brethren and sisterin, okay, there are those who are actively preparing for the coming of the Messiah and are actually preparing for the reinstatement of the ritual sacrifice, the rebuilding of the temple, and the seating of the high priest, and the re-performance of all the rituals and everything else. And there are a group that are working on breeding a red heifer so that when the Messiah comes, it will be ready to be burned and make the waters of lustration. So any of us who have unfortunately come into contact with the goof mate will be able to be purified from it and can then go about the business of making our sacrifice. So you only have to wait. It's just a matter of days now. We're waiting on the news that the red heifer is ready and we'll be good to go.
Yay.
Yeah, good. There you go. Fabulous. Other thoughts of this? The eventually, yes. There's no lock on religious extremism, as we should certainly realize amongst our brethren and sisters as well as other groups. Now, Rashi makes an important point to us here. This is ultimately for only a human corpse. The uncleanness resulting from animal carcass does not require this type of sprinkling. And then he goes on to talk about some other things there that has gone on. So his uncleanness is still about, even though he's ritually bathed, right? Even though he's cleansed himself from a ritual standpoint, his uncleanness is still upon him until he's had this water that's been sprinkled on him on the third day and on the seventh day, and only then is he fit to return to sort of group company. So there was somebody's hand was raised. I saw who has.
Yes, Rabbi.
Yes.
I was, when you discussed Miriam and the water well, I will have a question.
Okay. That's actually not part of what I was going to cover this morning. So we can, if there's a moment or two toward the end, we can touch on that if you'd like. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
No worries. Other thoughts, other comments on this? We're ready to bravely forge ahead here. All right, let's take a look. Let's take a look here as we move on because we're showing the calendar. Oh, good. So this last cut here, sort of some of you kind of touched on this idea before, but again, it was one of the reasons why I thought that, this text was worth looking at from our modern sort of sensibility. Comes from Hiskuni, who's Rabbi Hiskuni ben Manoach, who was writing in the mid 13th century. He shall cleanse himself with it. Should you wonder how the red cow can make the unclean clean and the clean unclean, right? Which is the sort of question that we kind of began with this morning. Remember that fire can melt metal and harden eggs. Drugs can heal the sick and sicken the healthy. Right? So we shouldn't necessarily be surprised that there is an instance where this item that should be something that imparts purity in one sense imparts impurity in another. Because fire can make things soft or soft things hard. Drugs can make sick people healthy and healthy people sick, which again sort of goes back to this idea that we kind of looked at before, which is to say that sometimes in society we have to do things for ourselves that might be less than beneficial to others, but we do it because other people will benefit. Not beneficial to ourselves, but ultimately be beneficial to others, which I think is part of what being in society is all about.
Mhm.
Right? All right, so let's look ahead here to this last little shtickle, and then we can talk a little. This is the ritual. The person dies in a tent. All right, and again, here this is of course the most common place, right, for our ancestors that lived in the ancient world. They lived in tents, and that was the most common place for somebody to pass on. When somebody dies in a tent, whoever enters the tent and whoever is in the tent shall be unclean 7 days, and every open vessel with no lid fastened down shall be unclean. Some of you who were raised in more traditional households or spent time in more traditional communities may remember that there were a lot of rituals that families observed for when a loved one died. It was common to throw out standing water and to do things that were particular. A lot of those rituals come here from this section, right? Open vessels should be sort of poured out because the contents of that would be rendered unclean. So anyone who goes into the presence of the group mate, anybody who's been in the presence of the group mate becomes unclean at that time. And this bit of uncleanness is important for us to remember. Look, our ancestors did not understand germs. They didn't understand why it was that a dead body could be a dangerous thing. They only knew that it was. Tradition, of course, provides for us some reasoning, some rationale, some rules, ultimately to keep ourselves protected from a ritual and physical standpoint. In the open, should somebody die out in the open, anyone who touches a person who was killed or died naturally, or human bone, or grave shall be unclean 7 days. All right? So there's a lot of ways in which this impurity could be imparted. And it came, yes, from a dead body, but even from a bit of bone, or even somebody who came across a grave. All right? These were all things that imparted this status of impurity that we would be concerned with. Some of the ashes from the fire of cleansing shall be taken for the unclean person, and fresh water shall be added to them in a vessel. The person who is clean shall take hyssop, dip it in water, and sprinkle it on the tent, and on all the vessels and the people who were there, or on him who touched the bones, or the person who was killed or died naturally, or the grave. So whatever that object was that imparted impurity, they'll take some of this ash and they'll mix it up with water, and take the hyssop, this fragrant green growing thing, and shake it, spritz it around, both on the item itself and on the individual. The clean person shall sprinkle it upon the unclean person on the 3rd day and on the 7th day, thus cleansing him by the 7th day. Right? So now this person who is unclean shall be spritzed the 3rd day and on the 7th day. He shall then wash his clothes and bathe in water. At nightfall he shall be clean. If anyone who becomes unclean fails to cleanse himself, that person shall be cut off from the congregation. He has defiled God's sanctuary. The water of lustration is not dashed upon him. He is unclean. Let's do a lot of that water go around. David, yes, there must have been a lot of this water to go around. So there's a discussion amongst the scholars about how much ash there was and whether the amount of ash that was used was left over from Moses himself. And Rashi Let me see if I can scroll back up and find it here. So our old friend Rashi, who talks about this, hang on just a second. Oh, here we go. Okay, good. Instruct the Israelite people to bring you a red cow. At the very beginning of this passage, right? God spoke to Moses and Aaron saying, instruct the people to bring you a red cow. Why you in particular? Well, because Moses, you personally, should be known forever as the cow that Moses prepared in the wilderness. And so there is a discussion that actually there was enough of that ash from that first cow to have lasted the people throughout the whole entirety of the time that the temple was standing, which makes it all the much more important that should the Messiah come and rebuild the temple for us, we're going to need some new ash in order to sprinkle ourselves. So it should be any day now, so we're waiting. This should be a law for all time. Further, he who sprinkled the water of restoration shall wash his clothes. Whoever touches the water of should be unclean until evening. So we still have the same odd thing that whoever is doing the work of preparing this ash and sanctifying the person and cleansing them from the sin shall themselves be unclean. Let's take a last look at the comment here by Kiskuni. We'll do some questions, and then if there's time, we'll get to the question about Miriam and the well. Whoever touches the water of restoration. This answers the mockery of our Christian neighbors. It's burned outside the sacred area, but makes everyone who touches it unclean. Moreover, if it did not, those who wish to separate themselves from others by the extreme holiness might sprinkle themselves with it unnecessarily. This last bit here I like an awful lot. A colleague of mine, conservative colleague of mine, when we have a discussion about kashrut, he used to say that he considered that glatt kosher was actually trait, and his reasoning was that kosher is kosher, and that the pursuit of extra levels of kashrut actually had the opposite than intended effect. That kashrut was something that was invented to keep us separate from others. But the way some people pursue kashrut nowadays, it actually is a vehicle whereby we separate ourselves from ourselves. That some people go to such extremes that actually sort of transcends the whole purpose of what kashrut was all about in the first place. I like this idea here that Hiskuni has brought up because it's essentially the same kind of idea. If those who wish to separate themselves from others, their extreme holiness might sprinkle themselves with it unnecessarily. Right? That some people might be so eagerly to show how holy they are that they might take the ash unnecessarily, that if they should do so it would actually make them unclean. I kind of like that idea because sometimes our pursuit of holiness is a good thing. But if we do it in such a way that it actually separates ourselves from others, then it ends up having the opposite.
Okay, yeah. Right on, Rabbi.
All right, does create a loaf? Does everyone tradition create a loaves and crave a loaves and fishes story? That's an interesting question, Ray. Does every tradition crave a loaves and fishes story? Ray, I would say to a certain extent, I think, yeah. Okay, so if you're not familiar with this, so there's a tradition in a story that's told in the Christian Bible that Jesus and some of his followers are gathered with a big group, and they want to feed them, but there's not enough. And so Jesus is depicted as taking some fish and dividing it amongst his followers, and taking some bread and dividing it amongst his followers. He only has a few small fishes and a few small loaves of bread, and yet he divides it, and everybody eats of it. And at the end, they collect the leftovers, and there's so many more leftovers that they have more at the end than they started with. I'm going to tell you, I experienced this in my own life, believe it or not. When my oldest son, who just finished his freshman year of college, when he was about 4 or 5, we went to Target, and Target was offering these wonderful, warm, kind of s'more-like cookie things, and they were heated up. And my son grabbed one and ate it. And I swear to God, when he was done, there was more on his face and on his shirt and on his hands than he started with in the first place. So I myself have experienced a loaves and fishes story. So Ray, I would say to some extent, yeah, I think every tradition does, if not in the same way. Because look at what that story represents. The story represents is here you have, at least in the Christian tradition, the figure of Jesus, who is either God or an emissary of God, however we might want to interpret that, who is in a situation where the people who are following him are in need. And what does he do? Through the power of God, right? Through the power of whatever the patron God is of that group, is able to manifest a miracle whereby the needs of the community are fulfilled. But they're fulfilled in such a way that it's not just enough, it's more than enough, right? And again, look, this idea, if we think about religion and the way religion evolved, especially in the ancient world, the ancient world was a very frightening, unpredictable place, unlike our modern world, which is full of happy, good times, right? The thing for our ancestors in the ancient world, their fear and their uncertainty was based heavily on scarcity. Was there going to be enough food? Was there going to be enough water? Was there going to be enough to maintain and protect the community or the group? Think about the elements of the covenant, the breach that God makes with Abraham, right? Or what we read about in the section of Torah with the blessings and the curses. If you fulfill the blessings of God, if you fulfill the obligations of God, you'll have enough food and your land will be secure, and 10 of you will put to rout 1,000. You know, that's this idea that not only will we be blessed, but we be blessed with a surfeit. No, we won't just have enough, we'll have more than enough. Okay. So yeah, I think every tradition kind of has that idea where if we remain loyal to our patron God, God will protect us. God will provide for us, not just with a little, but with more than enough. Great question. All right, I promised Jane I would touch very quickly on the story of Miriam. Is Jane still on the call? Oh, sorry, not Jane. Sorry, yes, answer your question about Miriam. I'm sorry, did somebody had a question about Miriam before?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah, please.
But about the I heard from Rabbi Nanas that a water well followed her everywhere she went after she would cross the sea, and the angels and the water was there. And I'm a singer too.
Yes.
So I was thinking, Lord, I actually believe in the power of God creating miracles through us, through our actions, our intentions of our heart. And California's in a drought.
Yes.
So that being said, I need to sign with Columbia Records.
Good. We need so some of you have come across the custom at Passover of in addition to the Kos Eliyahu, the cup of Elijah that we have on our table that's full of wine, that Elijah comes to everybody's Seder and has a cup of wine, and by the end of the night is pickled and under the table, right? Some people have gotten into the habit of putting a Kos Miriam, a cup of Miriam on the table, which is a cup filled with water. And that's actually comes from the section that follows this a little bit later in the Torah portion, where it tells us about the death of Miriam. And immediately after the death of Miriam, we're told the people were without water. Now, the rabbis say, what does one have to do with the other? Why does the text tell us that Miriam died and some of the people are without water? It says, aha, when Miriam was still alive, wherever she pitched her tent, there was a magical stream that would sprout in its place. It would well to the surface that the people could get their water from. And once Miriam died, the people were without that miracle. They were without their wellspring. So people have gotten into the custom of putting this cup of water on their table in honor of Miriam and this miracle that she accomplished. If we think about this in a sort of broader context, Miriam, of course, who was, as Debbie the prophetess tells us, okay, she took her timbrel in her hand and led the people in song. Miriam represents this wonderful dynamic spiritual force that led our people in the wilderness along with Moses and Aaron. When she died, that spirit was lost to the people. And it's true that we need those voices, we need those spirits to slake our thirst, whether it be spiritual or physical, in whatever environment we might find ourselves.
Thank you, Rabbi. Pray
You're
for
very
me.
welcome. So let me stop here because I know that I want to be cognizant of time because I know Rabbi Davids, I know we've got to do Kaddish and whatnot at the end, and so I don't want to go too long because I don't want to overstay my welcome. So tell me what your thoughts are there, my friend. Rabbi Davids?
Okay, well, thank you very much. Steve, you have a quick question and then we'll move on?
A very quick one. When we enter this wilderness, it's so barren we have to live on manna. Where and how is there this transition to being in a land with animals all over the place?
Good. So I would, here's the cheap answer to that. You ready?
Sure.
The cheap answer is they got this red heifer from one of the cows that they brought with them from Egypt. I like to talk about this question has come up a lot over the years. Our ancestors were taught they left Egypt in a hurry. And they wandered in the wilderness, and yet they had all the stuff to build the tabernacle with them, and they had all these other things and all this other supplies. I like to refer to this as the Gilligan's Island conundrum, okay, in Judaism. Y'all remember Gilligan's Island, right? Does anybody remember Gilligan's Island? Okay, fabulous. So what's the story, right? They're on a 3-hour tour, okay, and the boat gets a problem, and they wash up, and they're marooned, okay? Everybody has all kinds of clothes, right? The Howells have all kinds of clothes, and Ginger and Marianne have all kinds of clothes. Why do they have so much stuff with them if they were on a 3-hour tour, right? Skipper and Gilligan live on the boat, and for the whole show, they wear the same clothes. If anybody should have had more clothes, it would have been the Skipper and Gilligan, right? So how come everybody has so much stuff? I'm being facetious, of course, to illustrate one of these challenges that we have when we read this story. Our ancestors left Egypt in a hurry. They didn't have time to bake their matzah, for goodness sake. They baked their bread. It got turned into matzah because they put it on their backpacks as they were schlepping out of town. On the other hand, tradition tells us that before we left Egypt, what did we do? What was the last thing we did before we left Egypt?
We plundered their houses.
We visited our neighbors, right? We went to the Myrna Patahs and we said, hey, Mr. Myrna Patah, can I borrow your silver punch bowl? I'm having a party, right? And we went to the Amenhoteps next door and said, Mr. Amenhotep, I'm having a little soiree. Can you mind if you loan me some of your silver goblets, right? So when we left Egypt, we despoiled the Egyptians. Okay. So within the Torah, there exists an explanation for how and why it was that our ancestors had these various things with them, what they needed.
But then it doesn't explain why they needed manna in the beginning.
Look, then how about this? Let's go back to what Ray's comment was, right? Does every tradition crave a loaves and fishes story? Okay, so look, how did God manifest the protection that God did for our ancestors in the wilderness? By providing for their needs. Look, if we press hard enough in any bit of this story, we can find ways to pick it apart or tear it down, which sometimes is useful. It's useful for us to do this sometimes. Other times, we've got to take a look at the story as a whole and understand and respect that it was trying to teach us something significant. Mainly, God looked out for our ancestors, and God took care of them. And when they needed things, when they needed food, they had food. When they needed a red heifer, they had a red heifer. When they needed to find gold and silver to build the tabernacle, pocket, it was there. Okay. Now, again, taking this story back and looking at it from our own perspective. Okay. We in our own lives, when we need things, it's there. We can find it. And that's part of what Judaism teaches us, that when we have needs, when we reach out to God, when we're in trouble or when we're having service, we're not completely alone and lost and afraid. God is there to help us.
Right on. That's for sure.
All right, hold on 1 second, please. A daughter is calling from Africa. Aviva?
Oh, wow.
Okay, I'm still teaching. I'll be back with you in 2 minutes. Call in 2 minutes, in 5 minutes. Call in 5. Love you, bye. I mean, just because she's in Rwanda doesn't mean I have to take her call. You understand?
Stan, tell her she's got a red heifer. We need one.
Yeah, actually, Steve, Rabbi Fratello was about to fully answer your question, balance between the red heifer and the manna, but we ran out of time.
We ran out of time.
Okay, so come back next year, this Cedra, and you will get the answer. You're just going to have to hold tight.
Unless I teach the wrong one again next year. I apologize for that, everybody.
No. But Steve, we were this close to being able to get the answer. And we ran out of time. I'm sorry. By the way, I really loved and would love to go into the notion that pure people who touch this special water become impure. This whole notion of excess piety is, wow, that's a good category. May I thank Rabbi Fratello, Tony, from all of us. This was great. I enjoyed it. And I only had 73 occasions in which I wanted to jump in, and I want to be praised for my self-control. You may applaud. Okay.
Proud of you.
Okay.
Thank you for not telling me all the times I got it wrong. I appreciate it.
No, you didn't get it wrong. I wanted to add, and Tony, it's always a joy and a delight to study with you. Thank you very much for your gift of time and of wisdom. It was terrific. And I assure you,
I long for a day when we can be in a room together again.
Oh God, yeah. I remember those days, Tony. You were actually physically present. But okay, to everybody, thank you for today. Thank you. And next week we'll be back in just boring old me. And we'll there's still so much in this Cedra, lot to do. We're going to go now. Oh, by the way, I have a totally unsolicited thing to say. Cantor last night, Cantor Gurney delivered an incredibly important statement. Read his essay or column in this week's Wilshire Boulevard Bulletin. It was mostly the same thing. I am so pleased with what Cantor Gurney had to say. So,
and share it with your friends who can't read it or don't have access to it, because it was incredible. Really was.
You mean you're agreeing with me?
Always.
Oh, that's so untrue.
I would never doubt you.
Yeah, right.
What's the subject matter?
Right.
What was the subject matter about?
The subject matter, go ahead. Merle, give a one.
It was about what's going on right now. There was and the things that are being denied to us. That's the things that are being taken away from us, and how we have to react and what we have to do and the things that can be done. And
real world stuff, Steve.
Right. It was so amazing. It was just, you have to read it, you have to share it, you have to make the point, because he spoke on behalf of all of us.
And I think that it would be a great idea after you do it. If you like the column, send him an email. Support this direct, open, honest, heartfelt statement.
Do you have his email address that you can share? Or Hannah, can you share it?
It's DG@WBTLA.
Yeah. And
thank you.
And one thing, it was very moving, as Rabbi David said, but most importantly, it was non-political. It was political, but not political because of the state we're all in, but it was non-political, taking sides, because as Rabbi Leader said, that 50% of our congregation may be one side, the other 50% the other side, and this is not a time to pit sides against each other. So Cantor Gurney's statement, Shabbat message was excellent in that way too. I appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you, David. You know, just forget, you know, I don't normally bump in that way on columns during the week, but this statement by the cantor last night was a gem. Okay. First of all, have a happy July 4th. We're now going to do Kaddish. We mentioned those who have passed away during the past month: Jay Goldberg, Eugene Pantuck, Helen Roseman, Marcy Siegel, Rita Weiss, Joseph David Weissman. Yortzites during this past week: Eugene Abrams, Beatrice K. Abramsky, Peter Bach, Teresa Benswe, Aline Jane Burkus, Freema Berman, Leonid Brandsberg, Norman Brenzel, Irene Broom, Irving Cheslaw, Gladys Cohn, Dorothy Cohn, Jim Dalla, Elizabeth Doyle, Richard Allen Ehrman, Julie Eisenstadt, Lynn Fields, Mae Fox, Matthew Gantz, Muriel Gee, Kimberly Glover, Joseph Goldberg, Barbara Goldberg, Edith Goldfein, Miriam Goodman, Lucille Green, Elise Grinstein, Henrietta Chaim, Louis Hakimi, Yael Harari, David Harrow, J. Daniel Hertz, Charlotte Hirsch, Helen Hockenberg, Irene Howard, Kayla Itzkowitz, Sylvia Jacobson, Henry Jasny, Shirley Kamens, Burton Kaplan, Gilbert Kaplan, Benjamin Karen, Regina Karolinsky, Martin Kaufman, Stephen Kessler, Sylvia Kupchik, Lillian Marion Kurtz, Hyman Langsam, Leon Lapidis, Henrietta Laxanetta, Harry Laxanetta, Jeanette Levin, Louise Rose Levine, Morris Levy, Sidney Levine, Mildred Lewis, Bloom, Margaret Lipman, Abe London, Sonny Lowy, Max Margolis, Louise Martin, Selma Melvoin, Joseph Marini, Franklin Meserve, Sheila Grace White Miller, David Mindlin, Ruth Mindling, Madeline Morin, Myrtle Mullins, Irving Needleman, Ray Pilarski, Rose Pullman, Tony Ramir Coleman, Kenneth Reckamp, Pauline Roberts, Suzanne Rocker, Lee Rockland, Rose Romick, Martin Ross, Minnie Rubin, Eugene Schwartz, Stephen Seif, Eugene Shaken, Isaac Shaw, Ken Sherman, Gertrude Sigaloff, Martin Small, Charles Stein, Henry Sugarman, Genia Shapiro, Fred Tarter, Stan Tendler, Goldie Tyfield, Dora Weinstein, Marvin Weisburn, Joe Wolf. I apologize for the names that I have mispronounced, and for names that have been omitted that you wish to be held in our minds now. Please speak those names out loud and bear the names of others in our hearts as well. We bear in mind the names of all of those who died in defense of the United States, those who died in defense of the state of Israel, those who died through senseless acts of terror and of war, those who have no one to say Kaddish for them. For all of these people, for all of those whom we bear in our hearts, for those who made the existence of the United States of America possible, we join together in Kaddish. Yitgadal, Yitkadash, Shemei Rabbah, Bialma, Divrachi Rute, Biamlith Malchute, V'chaye Chonokim, V'chaye Dechol Beit Yisrael, Ba'agala, Uvizman Karim V'imru, Amen. Yehi Shmei Rabbam B'vorach, Li'alam Li'omei Almaya, Yitbarach, v'yishtabach, v'yitpa'ar, v'yitromam, v'yitnaseh, v'yitadar, v'yitaleh, v'yitalal, shemei d'kulishah, richu, le'ela min kol v'yirchata v'shirata, tushbachata v'nechata, da'miran v'yalma v'imru amen. Yehi shlama rabba v'shemaya. V'chayim, aleinu v'yal kol Yisrael, tikkun amen. Oseh shalom v'nomal. Hu ya'aseh shalom. Aleinu v'yal kol Yisrael, v'imru amen. May who makes peace in the high places, make peace in our hearts, make peace in our homes, make peace in the household of Israel. Make peace among all the families and nations of earth, and let us say, Amen.
Amen.
May we bear in our hearts a vision that this nation can reclaim and assert and protect the values which led to its founding. May God, in God's own way, bring blessings to the United States of America. Thank you, thank you, thank you all. Have a beautiful weekend, a safe weekend. I look forward to studying with you again and to Rabbi Fratello again. Thank you. This has been a lovely, lovely Shabbat. Thank you.
Miss you
Shabbat
already.
shalom.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all
Love
very
you
much.
all. Bye-bye.
Stay away from the
Thank you.
fireworks.
Not a problem.
Really, bye-bye.
Shabbat shalom. Thank you
Love
both.
you all.
Th-
Thank
th-
you. Thank you.
Th- Thank you for reading the Kaddish at a slow pace, rabbis, so those of us not as fluent can follow along and not
Really.
not the Evelyn Wood speed reading contest.
Thank you. Miss you all already. Have a wonderful weekend. Be safe. Mwah.